November 12th, 1967. The air in the Ia Drang Valley hung heavy and humid, a suffocating blanket that offered no relief from the relentless Vietnamese sun. For Private First Class John R. Hayes, every breath was a conscious effort, each inhale a shallow gasp against the oppressive heat and the even more oppressive fear that clung to him like a second skin. He lay prone in the tall, razor-sharp elephant grass, the acrid smell of gunpowder and scorched earth burning his nostrils. Around him, the jungle, usually a symphony of buzzing insects and chirping birds, had fallen silent, a chilling prelude to the horrors that had just unfolded. Just hours before, this patch of jungle had erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, shouts, and explosions. Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, had been on a search-and-destroy mission, pushing deeper into enemy territory when they walked straight into a meticulously planned ambush. The North Vietnamese army, seasoned and ruthless, had sprung their trap with brutal efficiency. John remembered the initial volley, a terrifying hail of bullets ripping through the foliage, felling men before they even knew what hit them. He remembered the screams, the desperate calls for medics, the deafening roar of automatic weapons that seemed to come from every direction. He had been fortunate, or perhaps cursed, depending on how you looked at it. A sudden concussive blast from a nearby mortar round had thrown him clear of the immediate inferno, knocking the wind from his lungs and leaving him momentarily stunned. When his senses returned, he found himself amidst the chaos, but at the periphery, shielded by a small rise in the terrain. He tried to move, to crawl towards his comrades, but another burst of machine gun fire stitched a deadly line through the grass just inches from his head. He instinctively froze, pressing himself deeper into the earth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, a swirling vortex of violence that consumed everything in its path. John watched, horrified, as his friends, men he had shared K-rations with, laughed with, and trained with, fell one by one. The sheer ferocity of the NVA assault was overwhelming. The Americans fought back with incredible bravery, but they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and caught completely off guard. He saw Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran who always had an encouraging word, take a direct hit and slump lifelessly to the ground. He saw young Private Jenkins, barely out of high school, cry out for his mother before his voice was abruptly silenced. As the daylight began to wane, casting long, eerie shadows through the dense jungle, the American resistance began to falter. The NVA, sensing victory, pressed their advantage, moving through the battlefield with chilling precision, systematically clearing out pockets of resistance. John, still hidden, could hear their voices now, sharp and guttural, closer than he ever wanted them to be. He heard the sickening thud of their boots as they moved amongst the fallen, searching for any signs of life, any threat. It was then, as the sounds of the NVA grew closer, that a chilling thought, born of pure animal instinct, solidified in his mind. He had to pretend to be dead. It was his only chance. He had seen enough movies, heard enough stories, but this was not a movie. This was his life, hanging by the thinnest of threads. He forced his body to relax, to go limp, a monumental effort when every fiber of his being screamed to flee, to fight. He smeared dirt and blood, not his own, but from a nearby fallen comrade, onto his face and uniform. He lay perfectly still, his eyes half closed, fixed on a single blade of grass in front of him, trying to regulate his breathing, to make it shallow and imperceptible. The first NV a soldier to pass him was a young man, no older than John himself. He carried an AK-47 with a bayonet fixed, his face grim and determined. He walked past John, his gaze sweeping over the scene, but he didn't stop. John felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by the realization that this was far from over. Then came the sounds of them checking the bodies. A sickening prod with a boot, a quick glance, sometimes a more thorough search for weapons or intelligence. John heard them speaking in their foreign tongue, their voices devoid of emotion, like men simply doing a job. He could feel the vibrations of their footsteps getting closer. Closer. A pair of muddy boots stopped right beside his head. John's heart, which he had managed to calm to a dull throb, now threatened to explode from his chest. He could feel the heat radiating from the soldier's body, could smell the sweat and the faint scent of tobacco. He heard a click, and then a faint metallic scrape. He knew what it was. The bayonet. He felt the cold steel prod his side just above his hip. It was gentle at first, a test. John didn't flinch. He focused on that blade of grass, on the distant buzz of a fly, on anything but the terrifying reality of his situation. The prod became firmer, pushing into his flesh. He felt a sharp, stinging pain, but he bit down on his lip, refusing to make a sound, to give any indication of life. He could feel warm blood slowly seeping into his uniform, but he remained motionless, a stone amidst the carnage. The soldier lingered for what felt like an eternity, the bayonet still pressed against John's side. John imagined the soldier's face, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement, any shallow breath. He held his breath for as long as he possibly could, his lungs burning, his vision starting to tunnel. Just when he thought he couldn't hold it another second, the bayonet was withdrawn. The boots moved on. John allowed himself a tiny, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. But the ordeal was far from over. More NVA soldiers passed, some closer than others. He endured the sounds of their conversations, their movements, the occasional gunshot as they ensured no American soldier would rise again. He heard them collecting weapons, checking supplies, the sounds of a battlefield being scavenged. As darkness fully descended, a new layer of fear enveloped him. The jungle at night was a different beast altogether. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal cry sounded amplified, ominous. He imagined patrols moving through the darkness, their eyes accustomed to the gloom, perhaps seeing what he had so meticulously hidden in the fading light. He pictured venomous snakes slithering over him, insects crawling into his ears, but these thoughts were secondary to the ever-present threat of the NVA. He lay there for hours, rigid, unmoving. His muscles screamed in protest, aching from the unnatural stillness. His mouth was dry, his throat parched. He longed for a sip of water, for the ability to shift his weight, to just stretch his cramped limbs, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. The moon, a sliver of white in the inky sky, offered little illumination. The jungle canopy was too thick, blocking out most of the starlight. He was alone in a sea of dead and dying, a solitary island of life amidst the wreckage of battle. He thought of home, of his family, his girlfriend, the life he had left behind in a quiet American town. He pictured his mother's worried face, his father's steady gaze. He promised himself, if he made it out of this, he would never take a single moment for granted again. Hours bled into one another. He lost all sense of time, his internal clock replaced by the agonizing crawl of the night. He heard sporadic gunfire in the distance, indicating other engagements, other battles being fought across the valley. He wondered if anyone knew he was still alive. He wondered if anyone would come looking for them. Around midnight, a heavy tropical downpour began. The rain lashed down, turning the dusty earth into thick mud. It plastered his uniform to his skin, chilled him to the bone, and mixed with the blood and dirt on his face, creating rivulets that ran into his eyes, stinging them. But even the rain offered a perverse kind of comfort. It helped mask any faint sounds he might inadvertently make, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would wash away some of the scent of the dead, making him less distinguishable. He continued his macabre charade, enduring the cold, the wet, the gnawing fear that had become his constant companion. He listened intently, straining his ears for any sound that might indicate the NVA were still present, still patrolling. The rain intensified, making it even harder to hear, further isolating him in his terrifying vigil. It was somewhere in the pre-dawn hours, as the rain finally began to subside and a faint hint of gray began to appear on the eastern horizon, that John heard something different. The sound was faint at first, barely discernible over the receding echoes of the storm. It was the distinct thumping of helicopter blades. His heart leaped. Medevac? Resupply? Or another NVA insertion? He held his breath, straining to identify the type of helicopter. The sound grew louder, closer. And then he heard the unmistakable whirring of an American Huey. Hope, raw and powerful, surged through him, threatening to break his carefully maintained composure. He wanted to shout, to wave, to leap up and run towards the sound. But he forced himself to remain still, acutely aware that the NVA could still be lurking, and that American patrols might mistake him for an enemy in the dim light. The helicopter sounds faded, then returned, making passes over the area. He heard the distant voices of Americans now, their shouts carrying on the damp air. "Alpha Company! Any survivors?" He wanted to respond, but a surge of adrenaline, coupled with the stiffness in his limbs from hours of immobility, made it impossible. He tried to move, to signal, but his muscles rebelled. He could only manage a slight tremor. Suddenly, he heard footsteps again, closer this time, and unmistakably American. He heard their cautious calls, their weapons at the ready. "Clear! Move up! Stay alert!" He saw a pair of boots stop near him, American combat boots. He heard a voice, weary but alert. "Another one here, Sarge. Looks like he bought it." John gathered every ounce of strength he had left, every fiber of his being, and forced out a sound, a rasping, broken whisper. "I'm alive." The soldier above him froze. Then a gasp of surprise, followed by a rapid-fire succession of commands. "Medic, over here. We got a live one." Rough but gentle hands turned him over. The faces above him were blurred by his tears, by the exhaustion, by the sheer relief that flooded his entire being. He was safe. After 12 agonizing hours of pretending to be dead, he was finally alive. He was carried to a waiting Huey, the rhythmic thumping of its blades now a comforting lullaby. As he was loaded onto a stretcher, he looked back at the battlefield, now a desolate landscape of broken trees and silent bodies. He saw the faint outlines of his fallen comrades, their sacrifice etched into the very soil of Vietnam. The journey to the field hospital was a blur. He remembered the concerned faces of the medics, their quick, efficient movements, as they cut away his bloodied uniform, cleaned his wounds, and administered fluids. He remembered the warmth of a blanket, the first real warmth he had felt in what felt like an eternity. Later, as he lay in a cot, recovering, the full weight of what he had endured began to sink in. The images of the battle, the sounds, the smells, would forever be seared into his memory. He had faced death head-on, not with a weapon, but with an unwavering will to survive. He had outwitted his enemy by becoming invisible, by erasing himself from the living. John's story became one of legend within the company, a testament to his extraordinary courage and resourcefulness. He was debriefed extensively, his detailed account of the NVA movements and positions proving invaluable intelligence. Physically, his wounds were minor, a deep laceration from the bayonet, and countless scrapes and bruises. But emotionally, the scars ran far deeper. He would spend weeks in recovery, not just from his physical injuries, but from the psychological trauma of those 12 hours. The sounds of helicopters would trigger involuntary flinches. The smell of damp earth would bring back vivid memories of the battlefield. He received counseling, talking through the horrors he had witnessed, the fear he had overcome. His parents were notified of his survival, their relief palpable even over the crackling phone lines. They had been informed he was missing in action, presumed dead, and had begun the agonizing process of grieving. His call, telling them he was alive, was a miracle they had hardly dared to hope for. Upon his return home, John was greeted as a hero. There were parades, speeches, and accolades. But for John, the true victory wasn't in the medals or the recognition. It was in the simple fact of being alive, of breathing the clean air of his homeland, of seeing the faces of his loved ones. He carried the weight of his experience with quiet dignity. He rarely spoke of those 12 hours in detail, finding it difficult to put into words the profound terror and resilience he had felt. But he never forgot. He carried the faces of his fallen comrades in his heart, honoring their sacrifice by living his life to the fullest. He eventually married his girlfriend, settled down, and started a family. He found peace in the mundane routines of civilian life, a stark contrast to the brutal unpredictability of war. He worked hard, raised his children with love, and became an active member of his community. Yet, there were moments, even years later, when the memories would resurface. A sudden loud noise, a specific scent, or a particularly vivid dream would transport him back to the Ia Drang Valley, to the feeling of the bayonet against his skin, to the agonizing stillness of feigned death. He learned to cope with these flashbacks, to acknowledge them without letting them consume him. He found solace in sharing his story, in a general way, with other veterans, men who understood the unspoken language of war and survival. John R. Hayes's story is a powerful reminder of the human spirit's capacity for endurance, even in the face of unimaginable terror. It's a testament to the raw, primal instinct to survive, and the extraordinary lengths a person will go to protect their own life. His 12 hours of pretending to be dead were not an act of cowardice, but an ultimate act of bravery, a silent battle fought against overwhelming odds, a triumph of will against the certainty of death. His survival was a flicker of light in the darkness of war, a symbol of hope and resilience that resonated far beyond the jungles of Vietnam. His legacy lives on, a testament to the soldier who refused to die, who waited patiently in the shadows, and ultimately found his way home. His journey back to normalcy was a gradual one. He found purpose in helping other veterans, understanding their silent struggles, and offering a listening ear. He became an advocate for mental health awareness among service members, recognizing the invisible wounds that often linger long after the physical ones have healed. The Ia Drang Valley, that distant, sun-baked and blood-soaked piece of land, remained a vivid, almost tangible presence in his mind. He never returned to Vietnam, choosing instead to carry his memories with him, refining them, understanding them. He knew that the jungle had taken much from him, but it had also given him something profound, an unshakable appreciation for life itself, for every breath, every sunrise, every shared moment with loved ones. He taught his children about the importance of courage, not just in battle, but in everyday life. He instilled in them a sense of gratitude, reminding them that freedom often comes at a great cost. He spoke of his fallen comrades, ensuring their names and their sacrifices were never forgotten. As the years turned into decades, John R. Hayes grew older, his hair turning silver, his steps a little slower. But the quiet strength he had forged in those 12 hours never left him. He remained a man of deep resilience, a living embodiment of the spirit of survival. His story, though rarely told in its rawest form, became a beacon of hope for many. It was a story of a soldier who, against all odds, chose life, and in doing so, taught us all about the true meaning of perseverance. The memory of the cold bayonet, the suffocating silence, the burning fear, these things never truly faded. But over time, they were tempered by the warmth of family, the joy of laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. John R. Hayes, the soldier who pretended to be dead for 12 hours, was a testament not just to survival, but to the enduring power of the human spirit to heal, to rebuild, and to find peace even after staring into the abyss. His tale is a timeless reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found, and the will to live can conquer even the most terrifying of circumstances.